All right, let's do Montreal here, shall we? I'm not quoting some nasty adult horror movie or adult movie either when I say that. So let's do Montreal.
I was taking a second.
Yeah, I figured I was going to see if you're paying attention.
I wasn't.
All right, you're in the hockey poll one right now.
I am. Yeah, I'm doing the updates.
She's doing the updates on the hockey poll, so all the totals will be posted. I'll post all the totals this week. I can see when you do that now because you're on the camera, so I can see what you're doing when you look at me while and I don't know you're because now I know. And it's that. What the fuck are you talking about, look? Or pardon? That look. All right, so Montreal. This jersey I'm wearing is my Brian Giontek jersey. When I'm wearing this, it means I'm the captain. Listen to what I have to say.
Haha, good luck with that. I mean,
I'm totally in control. Now Montreal. Now the interesting thing is, I'm starting with the jersey here, and I looked all over online, and apparently any information on the entry draft before it existed, in terms of why it was brought in and how it affected the Montreal Canadiens. The unskilled person skilled enough to have killed him, and he's raging over it. Here's my kids raging down the hall at Dark Souls. You sure you don't want me to plug in that HDMI cable so you can watch him die and then listen to him rage down the hall?
I'll be laughing.
And then he'll come out and see it. He'll freak out on us.
Right.
All right.
No.
Okay.
No,
Montreal. And Montreal's a team that, back in their beginnings, very similar to what they have now. In the beginning, the Montreal Canadiens entered the NHL in 1917-18 wearing a sweater very similar to the current jersey. A red C, white H, and blue stripe across the chest with thin white stripes around the blue bar. But they've used 20 jersey designs during their century of play. It all began in 1910 with a blue sweater featuring a white C and piping that created a bib effect. Changes came in the 1910-11 season in the form of red uniforms with a green maple leaf and stylized C and A, standing for Canadians and Athletic. 2 years later, Montreal was wearing a red, white, and blue uniform with CAC logo for Canadian Athletic Club. In 1916, an H for hockey replaced the letter A after the team was purchased by the Canadian Hockey Club. Other than 1924-25, when the CH logo was replaced by a globe, signifying world champions, the traditional jersey has since withstood the test of time. Wait, so I'm wearing a hat that signifies the Montreal Canadiens are world champions? No wonder it burns when I wear it. Putting the sweat in the sweater. He has made playing defense along with meting out punishing checks fashionable during a time when the scorers got the glory. The first check Bob Gainey made during an exhibition game was on Bobby Orr, and Gainey never looked back. No player brought more to the arena. He was called the world's best technical player by Russian coach Viktor Tikhonov. And he was. Bob Gainey was amazing. The Selke trophy that's given out now is the Bob Gainey trophy. Really is. And then they got something in here on Maurice Richard, but the Montreal jersey really never changes, and there's a reason. It is the nicest jersey in hockey, and I know Chicago fans are going to want to jump on that. Fans of Toronto are going to want to jump on that too, but Montreal has stayed the same for the most part through the last almost 100 years. And that says something because Toronto's made changes to the logo, and there's been changes in Chicago over the years. And right now there's changes going on in Chicago as we watch protests, but it's not sports on my TV right now. I would love to stream tonight, but I don't know if I can stream while these protests are going on. I don't know where these are going to go. This is being recorded on Remembrance Day, ironically, 2016. All right, so this is the Best of magazine that I have. So Best of Everything in Hockey, which was published in 2012. Means there's another one due out this spring coming up. I'm very anxious for that because they came out 5 years apart between this one and the first one they did. So I'm assuming they're going to bring out another one. Montreal Canadiens 1976-77. It might be difficult to believe, but the Montreal Canadiens actually had a losing record against the Boston Bruins in 1976-77. After one of those losses, superstar Guy LaFleur said, "I will never accept losing, never. The law of averages is bound to catch up with us, but that's no excuse for a bad performance." And that, in a nutshell, is what made the 76-77 Canadiens the greatest collection of talent in the history of the game. The Canadiens opened that season with a 10-1 win over the Pittsburgh Penguins. Finished it with a 2-1 overtime win over the Bruins in Game 4 of the Stanley Cup. And in between, they were the most electrifying, dominant, and unstoppable team the NHL's ever seen. All told, they established 21 NHL records that season, including a 132-point performance that still stands as a league benchmark. And remember, there were no loser points the season they had 132 points. Their goal differential was 216. It's by far the best in NHL history, 40 ahead of the next best mark, which was set in 77-78 by the Habs as well. When we scrimmaged, you were playing against the best players in the world, recalled Peter Mahovlich. You couldn't help but get better because we had a bunch of guys who loved to be on the ice. When you consider Montreal's dominance that season, you must look at it through the prism of a 4-year run in which the Habs won 4 Stanley Cups and established themselves as arguably the most dominant dynasty in the history of the sport. In those 4 years, the Canadiens lost just 46 games, an average of 11.5 a season. Again, this was before overtime losses or shootout losses. To trace the lineage of that team, you have to go back to a few years prior to the 1971 campaign, when the Canadiens shocked the hockey world by stunning the powerhouse Bruins in the first round of the playoffs en route to the Stanley Cup. As dominant as those teams were, however, they were not the 1976-77 Canadiens, the standard by which all other great teams in the NHL will continue to be measured. So, there you go. And as a Boston Bruins fan, it is hard. It is hard to look and admit. And this was the thing, too. Montreal had cultural status. There's a cultural thing involving their players. So players born in Quebec were naturally born into the Montreal Canadiens organization. There's something to be said for the idea that if you're born in Ontario, you play for the Leafs. You're born in Quebec, you play for Montreal. There's something cool about that. And at the same time, it did leave teams in the U.S. with a major disadvantage. So any American team that won the Stanley Cup in those years that was going on, props to them. But it was overall dominance by Montreal and Toronto in the 50s and 60s. All right, the birth of the Montreal Canadiens. Towards the end of the 19th century, hockey was prevalent in Montreal, and the city was represented by 3 of the 5 teams in the Amateur Hockey Association: the Crystals, the Victorias, and the AAA Winged Wheelers. The latter club had won the first ever Stanley Cup award in 1893. 3 seasons later, the Crystals merged with the Montreal Shamrocks, and the new amalgamation adopted the Irish-oriented nickname to reflect the demographic of its players. The Victorias were comprised of players of Scottish descent, while the AAA club was predominantly a British-born team. That's how far back we're going here, boys and girls. Scots and Irish and British. But there was no team to represent the French population, despite the fact that 2/3 of the city's inhabitants were francophone. Teams such as the Nationals and... Okay, I can't even pronounce that. Right here.
Montagnard?
Montagnards. Take her word for it. She's got the French first name. Were created to satisfy the market, but both were out of senior hockey by 1907. The few French players were left to play for either the Shamrocks or another Montreal team, the Wanderers, that had joined the Federal Amateur Hockey League at the start of the 1904-05 campaign. The Wanderers had forged a bitter rivalry with the Ottawa Senators, losing the Stanley Cup to their foes on the second last day of 1908-09 season in the Eastern Canada Amateur Hockey Association. At that league's annual preseason meeting in November, held at Montreal's Windsor Hotel, expansion was on the agenda. Ambrose O'Brien was in attendance to apply for a franchise for his hometown club, the Renfrew Creamery Kings. I think Creamery Kings would be a really tough name to sell now to NHL fans. Meanwhile, the rivalry between the Senators and the Wanderers had extended from beyond the ice to the boardroom. Ottawa objectified to Wanderers owner Patrick J. Dolan's intent to use the Jubilee Arena as his hometown's rink when the Westmount Arena could accommodate more than twice as many fans. The reciprocal agreement among all 4 teams in the association provided for the sharing of gate receipts. When the Senators, Shamrocks, and Quebec Bulldogs threatened to disband the ECAHA, those representing the Wanderers at the meeting stormed out in protest. But one of them, Jimmy Gardner, stayed behind and befriended O'Brien. Gardner pitched the idea of forming a league that would include Renfrew, Cobalt, and Haleyburg. He also suggested adding a French team in Montreal to complement the existing English-speaking franchises. The proposal was too good to pass up. O'Brien and representatives from cities formed the National Hockey Association on December 2nd, 1909. 2 nights later, they announced the creation of a new team, Les Clubs de Hockey Le Canadien, a name represented by the C and the H in the logo of hockey's most storied franchise. So there you go. It was just a cluster at the beginning. And the Richard Riot, which seems appropriate considering what's going on in the U.S. right now. So let's see what started the Richard Riot. And I'm sure for Montreal fans, you're going to be like, well, I know what started the Richard Riot. Hey, there's people that don't know that will be watching this video. I know, but let's get into the article. In Montreal, where hockey is followed with religious zeal, the Canadiens are supported with fervent loyalty. Unfortunately, that passion and enthusiasm transformed into one of the most infamous events in hockey history towards the end of the 1954-55 regular season. Maurice Rocket Richard was unquestionably the franchise's superstar, the all-time NHL leading goal scorer. Richard appeared to be a cinch to win his first scoring title headed into the final weeks of the season. But on March 13, 1955, during a game in Boston, Richard was high-sticked by Hal Laycoe of the Bruins. Incensed, the Rocket furiously attacked Laycoe, forcing linesman Cliff Thompson to break up the altercation. Richard punched Thompson in the face, earning an ejection for his actions. 3 days later, League President Clarence Campbell suspended Richard not only for the remaining 3 games of the regular season, but for the entire Stanley Cup playoffs. Of course, Clarence Campbell was punched in the face when he was a referee too, and you guys who've been watching this series of videos will remember that bit from my Boston video. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch the Boston videos. Apparently Clarence Campbell had a face that was worth punching. He was the Ted Cruz of his time. Incredulous at the severity of Richard's punishment, the Habs soldiered on, playing their next game on St. Patrick's Day at the Montreal Forum versus Detroit. Midway through the first period, Campbell took his customary seat in the arena, undeterred by the harshest critics who were pelting the league's president with tomatoes, shoes, eggs, and other projectiles. I can just imagine what some of those projectiles might have been. A fan who had slipped past an usher feigned a handshake, instead slapping Campbell in the face. So that's, instead of doing the whole, and then, doing the hand through the hair, you just smack right in the face. The mayhem continued. A tear gas bomb exploded, and the game, which the Canadiens were losing, was halted. The spectators hastened toward the exits, spilling onto Rue Sainte-Catherine. From there, chaos ensued. Unforgiving fans resorted to smashing windows, looting stores, and tearing down signs. Cars were vandalized, and newspaper stands were burned. Over 100 perpetrators were arrested. Police enlisted Richard's help in restoring order. The next day, the Rocket went on radio, pleading to Montreal fans to support the Canadiens without violent protests. "I will take my punishment and come back next year to help the club and the younger players win the cup," he said. There was no further damage on the streets, but the Habs season had been irrevocably altered. The Canadiens forfeited the March 17th game to Detroit, then missed out on first place by 2 points to the rival Red Wings. Bernie Geoffrion, surpassed his teammate Richard by 1 point to win the Art Ross Trophy, and was booed for his efforts by the home team crowd. The home crowd booed him. Just imagine that. Yay, I won the scoring title, and your own fans boo you for doing it. I love Montreal fans. They're fantastic. The home ice advantage earned by the Red Wings by virtue of the first place finish proved to be advantageous in the finals. In a 7-game series where neither road team could win, Detroit outlasted Montreal. Montreal's biggest trades. May 22nd, 1970. This is the stupidity of the California Golden Seals. Montreal traded Ernie Hickey and Canadiens' first-round draft pick in 1970, Chris Odlison, who'd end up playing more in Vancouver than he played in California, for Francois Lacombe and the Golden Seals' first-round draft pick in 1971, who became Guy LaFleur. Whoops. Eccentric Golden Seals owner Chuck Findlay had to be pleased with his team's second consecutive playoff berth in 1969-70. Optimistic about California's potential return to the postseason, Finley dealt away the first-round draft choice in 1971, not realizing its subsequent ramifications for either his team, his trading partner Montreal, or for hockey history. California's 1970-71 campaign was disastrous. By late January, the Seals had won just 14 of 47 games, and a surefire prospect was setting junior hockey records for the ages with the Quebec Ramparts, a kid from Thurso, Quebec named Guy LaFleur. Montreal general manager Sam Pollock, who held the Seals pick, orchestrated a subsequent trade to maximize California's chances of finishing last place. He traded Ralph Backstrom to the Los Angeles Kings for Gord Laboissere and Roy Fortin in an attempt to help boost the Kings' offense. Pollock's masterful plan came to fruition. In an era long before a lottery determined the first pick, California's finish in the basement of the standings assured the Canadiens of the coveted spot in the draft. Not surprisingly, LaFleur was selected first overall by Montreal in June 1971. A three-time Hart Trophy winner and all-time franchise scoring leader, LaFleur unquestionably stands as one of the Habs' all-time greats. Honorable mention, June 1964, and this one hurts. Boston Bruins trade Ken Dryden and Alex Campbell to Montreal for Guy Allen and Paul Reed. The NHL amateur draft was instituted to create parity among all franchises in what was then a 16 league. While the Leafs and Canadiens consistently built winning rosters by developing younger players through junior and senior teams which they sponsored, opponents such as Boston and Chicago had no such luxury. And that's the thing. They had their junior teams. They would basically, we reserve all these players, they're all ours, develop them, and then the ones that didn't quite make it, you'd let them go to the American teams, and then the ones that were really good, you could keep them for life. There was no signing 3-year contracts. It was just you belonged to a team until they traded you. The year 1964 marked the second year that the NHL draft was held. Boston selected Ken Dryden with the 14th overall pick. A goaltender with the Etobicoke Indians of the Junior B circuit, Dryden had expressed interest in playing college hockey in the States. Boston traded Dryden to Montreal in a four-player swap. The future Hall of Fame netminder was oblivious to the transaction, admitting several years later that he always believed the Canadiens to be the team that drafted him. Dryden rose to prominence during the 1971 playoffs when he led the Canadiens to an unexpected Stanley Cup. Keep in mind, that's the same year that they got Guy LaFleur for free. So, my love of Montreal continues just with that. And let's talk about Dryden's rookie playoffs. 1970-71 season was dominated by the record-setting Boston Bruins. The team won an unprecedented 657 games and boasted the league's top 4 scorers in the regular season. Boston was the clear favorite in the quarterfinal series against Montreal. This is a popular refrain. Boston's a favorite, they're coming in as the #1 team, and then Montreal just blows them out of the water. The Canadiens had a very respectable finish after missing the playoffs the previous year for the first time in over 2 decades, closing out the regular season with the NHL's 4th best record. As they entered the postseason, the biggest question was whether their starting goaltender would be regular Rogie Vachon or backup Phil Muir. And the answer was neither. Instead, the Habs went with 23-year-old Ken Dryden, a Cornell University graduate who had spent most of the year with the Canadiens' minor league affiliate, the Montreal Voyageurs. Dryden had only 6 NHL regular season games of experience to his credit, all played at the end of the season. He won them all, allowing only 9 goals. Dryden's playoff initiation was a baptism by fire as the netminder was peppered with 42 shots in Game 1, a 3-1 Boston win. So far, so good. The series turned in the second game as Montreal staged a miracle comeback. Down 5-1 in the second period, the Canadiens stormed back with 6 unanswered goals to take the game and even the series. Ultimately, Montreal prevailed in 7 games, dethroning the defending champs. Dryden allowed 26 goals and 286 shots, a remarkable save percentage in an era of free-flowing hockey and smaller goalie equipment than used today. That save percentage is unheard of back in that era. Dryden continued to play every minute in the Canadiens' net as the team took care of the Minnesota North Stars in 6 games, and then in the finals, Montreal faced the Chicago Blackhawks, led by the Golden Jet Bobby Hull. Dryden's counterpart, Tony Esposito, was just as formidable between the pipes. So Tony Esposito was a fantastic goaltender. The series went the distance, and Game 7 was played at the Chicago Stadium on May 18th. Although the Blackhawks jumped out to a 2-0 lead, the game turned when Jacques Lemaire's shot from center ice somehow made its way past a bewildered Esposito, silencing the crowd. Goals from center ice will do that. Just ask Dan Cloutier, or Freddie Anderson, or Steve Mason. Chicago couldn't recover from the blunder. Henri Richard scored a pair of goals, the latter holding the update as the Stanley Cup winner as Montreal claimed its unlikeliest of championships. Dryden was sensational in the final minutes of the third period, making several game-saving stops. Dryden was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy for his heroics. The next season, he took home the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year. No other player has ever won those awards in that order. So Conn Smythe and then Rookie of the Year. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. So here's Montreal's history, and it does go 100 years. And all of those black ones there, those are all Stanley Cups. Notice they come to a stop about 20 years ago. See, in my time watching Montreal, okay, I came in the early 80s. So I came into watching hockey when the New York Islanders were dominating. The Edmonton Oilers were on their way up. Infinite. Okay.
This is not very long. It reminds
Yeah.
me of my kid, Adelaide. It reminds me of Adelaide.
Okay. Adelaide's 3. just
Well, think about how often she says it's not fair.
just to put a certain spell, that's my son playing video games. Sounds very similar to her 3-year-old. So, anyway, all right. And that's immortalized on the internet. That's just awesome. 20 years from now, he can look back at this, say, "There's my dad. Oh, that's me freaking out down the hall at a video game." Dark Souls 3. By then, we'll be up to like Dark Souls 46 or something like that. You know, the Wrath of Khan, whatever they're going to call it. But yeah, when I came into watching hockey, it was the Islanders and Montreal was still one of the top 5 teams in the league. They were always consistently good. Like, okay, in 1980, they were first in the division. They were first in the division in 81, 82. They were second in 83. And they lost in the second round. They lost in the first round 3 times. You know, conference final in 84. They lost the second round in 85, where they were first in their division. They were second, first, third, second, first. They've always been very, very good. But the dominance that Montreal had started to erode. The Stanley Cups in 86 and 93 were both for one person, Patrick Roy. And I looked for it. I looked for an article in these magazines on Patrick Roy's rookie year in 1986. Patrick Roy's rookie year in 1986 was fantastic. The team had gone through some iffy goaltenders. Richard Sevigny was okay. Denny Huron was okay. And Steve Penny was another one. They'd gone through just some okay goaltenders, and then Roy came up, and it was sensational to watch him play. He revolutionized the game. And it seems like that's a Montreal thing. You have Jacques Plante, who revolutionized the game by wearing a mask. He's a Montreal goaltender. Georges Vezina, who the Vezina Trophy is named after, a Montreal goaltender. The awards in goal, in terms of shutouts and all that. George Hainsworth, a tremendous goaltender for Montreal. Montreal knows its goaltending. So where we are right now, with Carey Price as the best goaltender in hockey, this is a Montreal thing. This is what they do. For anybody who figures Martin Brodeur in New Jersey, now Corey Schneider, New Jersey kind of poached that a little bit. You think about who ran New Jersey for a while there, and you've got, you know, Lou Lamoriello, but you've got Larry Robinson played a big part in that team. Jacques Lemaire played a big part in that team. You had a very Montreal flavor to the defense and to the way the goaltending was figured out, and I don't think that was an accident. Montreal was the team that you emulated. And then something happened. Now, people say, well, it was the Patrick Roy trade. The Patrick Roy trade wasn't very good for Montreal. And anybody would admit that. Anybody. Jocelyn Thibault would admit right now that was a poor trade for Montreal because he knew he wasn't Patrick Roy. But in 1986, when Montreal won that Stanley Cup and they beat Calgary in the final, it was the most remarkable final run to that point that I had witnessed in my lifetime. And 93 was a repeat of that. 10 wins in overtime. 10 times games went to overtime. And as soon as it hit overtime, Patrick Roy said, "This isn't going in my net." And I remember being a guy who hated Montreal. and I'm still there. But man, it was hard not to respect Patrick Roy. And when he scooped up a puck in the Stanley Cup final in '93 and he winked, I was like, wow, now that's arrogant. The only goalie I can think of in the current NHL game who has that talent and that attitude is Braden Holtby. So I'm kind of surprised he's not a Montreal goalie, because that combination of attitude and winning and just the talent, that's a Montreal thing. When Ken Dryden left the NHL, he was still in his prime. I think that if Ken Dryden had played until he started to decline, I think Dryden's work ethic and I think his drive and determination to be the best at anything he did, I think he'd still own the record book. I think if Patrick Roy, his competitive nature, if he had known that Martin Brodeur was going to break his records, I think he would have played another 3 or 4 years just to make it more difficult for him to beat those records. Montreal, when I look at them, as much as I dislike the team as the team, and the current group is not where that group was. Montreal is a pretty damn good team for the fact that they have Carey Price. They traded for Shea Weber. Gutsy move. Balls out move. And where they are right now, they are Canada's best chance for another Stanley Cup. And they have 24 of them to the record. And you can look back and go, well, the last one they won is '93. And I say that a lot. I do say a lot. Montreal fans live in the past. But all Canadian fans do. Let's be honest. All Canadian hockey fans right now are living in the past when they talk about any kind of glory, any kind of contention, anything like that. Because none of us are there. None of our franchises are there. Montreal is as close as it gets. And you can say, oh, well, they'd suck without Price. Yeah, and Montreal in '86 doesn't win without Patrick Roy. Montreal doesn't win in '93 without Patrick Roy. And they are the last Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup, and they're the most likely to win the next Stanley Cup. So our dislike for Montreal may grow, but this is a world champion logo. This is a jersey worn by many Stanley Cup champions. When you look at the career leaders, the surprising thing is number one on the list of games played is still Henri Richard with 1,256, at a time when there wasn't 82 games in a schedule. Larry Robinson's second with 1,202. Bob Gainey's third with 1,160. Warrior that guy was. I loved Gainey. I disliked Montreal, but I loved Gainey. Jean Beliveau, 1,125. Claude Provost with 1,005. Maurice Richard, 978. Yvon Cournoyer with 968. Guy LaFleur with 961. Should have been longer, but his ice time got cut. He said, that's it, I'm done with hockey, and he quit, and then he came back later and played for Quebec and the Rangers in what had to be considered sacrilegious at the time. Andre Markov's played 942, so he will pass Guy LaFleur on that list, which is crazy. Serge Savard is 10th with 917. Goals, we're not going to see Markov on that list. Goals, Maurice Richard is one with 544. Second, Guy Lafleur with 518. Jean Beliveau, 507. Yvon Cournoyer, 428. Steve Shutt, 408. Boom Boom Geoffrion, 371. Jacques Lemaire, 366. Henri Richard, 358. Auriel Joliet, 270. Mario Tremblay, 258. That's right, Mario Tremblay scored 258 goals as a Montreal Canadian. Before he was busy making sure Patrick Roy left, he was actually a pretty good player. Assists, Guy Lafleur, 728. Jean Beliveau, 712. Richard, 638. Robinson, 686. Jacques Lemaire, 469. Saku Koivu, 450. Yvon Cournoyer, 435. Andre Markov, 430. So he is in position right now to pass Yvon Cournoyer on the assist list. Maurice Richard, 421. Elmer Lack, 408. Points, so you got Guy Lafleur with 1,246, Jean Beliveau 1,219, Henri Richard with 1,046, Maurice Richard 965, Larry Robinson 883, Yvon Cournoyer 863, Jacques Lemaire 835, Steve Shutt 776, Bernie Geoffrion 759, and Saku Koivu with 641 is 10th on that list. Power play goals, Yvon Cournoyer leads that list with 153. Guy Lafleur is next with 138. I think half of those were scored against Boston. Steve Shutt, 90. Jacques Lemaire, 89. Saku Koivu and Mats Naslund are tied with 66 in 5th place. Robinson, 65. Jean Beliveau, 63. Andrei Markov 59, and Stefan Richer with 58 is 10th. And it's impressive to see Robinson and Markov there since they're defensemen. Shorthanded goals, and this is where Montreal really shows their defensive dominance. Guy Carbonneau's number 1 with 27. Carbonneau, much like Gainey before him, fantastic defensive forward. Bob Gainey second on this list with 20. Thomas Plekanec has 19. Pete Mahovlich has 17. Vinny Domfus, 12. Benoit Brunet, Martin Verchinsky, and Jimmy Roberts are tied for 6th with 10. And then 9th, you have got a tie between Saku Koivu, Serge Savard, and Frank Mahovlich with 9. Yeah, I know. He couldn't believe Frank Mahovlich was on the list either. And, you know, and there we go. Yeah, the game sucks because he can't win. Okay. Goaltenders. Wins. Jacques Plante still number 1 with 314. Patrick Roy second with 289 because of Mario Tremblay. Third is Ken Dryden with 258. Carey Price is 4th on this list with 242. So Carey Price has a real shot here. That'd be 72 wins. I'll say 2.5 years from now, he'll probably be passing Jacques Plante. Health being, on his side. Bill Durnan has 208. George Hainsworth 167. Michel Larocque, Bunny Larocque, 144. Jose Theodore is 8th with 141. Jerry McNeil 119. Charlie Hodge with 115. So pretty impressive list. It takes 115 wins to get into the top 10 on that one. Save percentage, and this is where sadly we're not going to see some of the greats. Carey Price is number 1 with 920. He's tied with Cristobal Huet. Yarrow Halak had 919, Jeff Hackett 912, Jose Theodore 911, Jocelyn Thibault 908, and then Patrick Roy with a 904. But this was before goaltending was where it is now. Brian Hayward 889, Richard Sevigny, he was another one that predated Roy, wasn't very good, 869, and Steve Penny with an 865. So I remember Sevigny, and I remember Penny, and I remember a lot of those goalies that were able to win in the regular season, but man, in the postseason, they got torn to pieces. Shutouts. Number 1 on that list is George Hainsworth with 75. Jacques Plante second with 58. Third's Ken Dryden with 46. Carey Price is already 4th on this list with 37. So he's halfway to George Hainsworth. Could he get there? Absolutely. Bill Durnan, 34, Patrick Roy, 29, Jerry McNeil, 28, Jose Theodore, 23, Charlie Hodge, 21, and Wilf Cood with 18 is 10th on that list. So there you go. Montreal, where they've been, where they are is probably the Canadian team, as I've said, most likely to win everything. You look at their record currently, it's fantastic. It's not all based on Carey Price. Price was hurt early in the season, and Al Montoya won a lot of games and played very well in them. Montreal's a very sound defensive team. They always have been. And usually if you looked at goals against averages at the end of the year, Montreal was at or near the top. They understood before the NHL caught up with them, when even in the freewheeling 80s.
That's how things get on. Right.
But he denies to me that happens. Now you see why I don't want to replace anything that gets broken anymore. Understood?
I already understood how the TV.
Okay. All right. So anyways, Montreal, if you're a Montreal fan, this is a good time for you because you got Carey Price, the best goalie in the league. One of the best goalies. He's definitely the best goalie I've seen in the last, I'll say, 20 years. And I'll say that knowing that people are going to say, what about Hasek? What about Lundqvist? What about... Yeah, I know. Great goalies as well. There's a temper issue there. But he denies it's there.
Oh, it's there.
All right. Anyways, thanks for watching. The comedic relief is provided by my son from down the hall. Anyhow, I will be back tomorrow to discuss the history of the Nashville Predators. And I can't think of a history that could be more opposite than Montreal, but hey, PK Subban's in Nashville. Shea Weber's rocking this jersey now. So, there's a relation there. Maybe that's why the trade happened. Maybe Bergevin could only trade with a team that was right next to them alphabetically, and Minnesota was up, Nashville was down, and he talked to both and didn't want Ryan Suter. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe that's all that happened. Anyways, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're just passing through. As I said before, this is being taped on Remembrance Day 2016, so keep that in mind if you're coming in months down the road. And I will be back soon with more content. Thanks for watching.